At 70 years old, my son-in-law looked me dead in the eye and laughed, certain that I was a broken, bankrupt old man who had outlived his usefulness. He thought it was funny to humiliate me in front of his wealthy friends just to put me in my place and stroke his own massive ego. He had no idea that while he was pouring expensive champagne and mocking my worn-out shoes, my phone was vibrating in my pocket with a message from my private wealth manager confirming a $4.5 million deposit. His laughter died pretty quickly after that. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jack Preston. Grab a cup of coffee and settle in. If you have ever sacrificed your own comfort for your family only to be treated like a burden when they think you have nothing left to give, take a deep breath and listen closely to my story. This experience might just change how you handle the disrespect in your own life. Do me a favor and hit the subscribe button right now to support this channel. Tell me in the comments down below where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. It means the world to me. Now let me tell you how that unforgettable night actually began. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion. My daughter Sarah and her husband Bradley were celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary at an exclusive downtown restaurant, a place with valet parking and menus that do not list prices, because if you have to ask, you do not belong there. I arrived exactly 10 minutes early wearing the very best tailored suit I owned. It was a classic charcoal gray two-piece I bought exactly 15 years ago, faded around the edges but clean and pressed. When I walked into the private dining room, the air was thick with expensive perfume and roasted meat. Bradley was holding court at a massive oak table with his stockbroker friends. He spotted me and his smile vanished, replaced by a condescending smirk. He walked over, looking me up and down like I was trash. "Jack," he said loud enough for the nearby tables to pause and hear. "I see you dug out the old reliable suit again. And those shoes." He pointed directly at my brown leather Oxfords, which were badly scuffed at the toes. "We are at a 5-star establishment, Jack, not the local diner. You could have polished them." Before I could formulate a response, he placed a heavy hand on my shoulder and steered me away from Sarah. Sarah gave me a quick, apologetic glance, but then she quickly looked down at the table. I assumed there would be an empty seat next to her. Instead, Bradley guided me toward a cramped table tucked away in the back corner, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Waiters were constantly rushing past, bumping roughly into the chair. "I thought you would be more comfortable back here," Bradley said, with fake concern. "You know how loud we get, and you complain about your hearing. Besides, we do not want your outfit ruining the aesthetic for Sarah's anniversary photos. Enjoy the bread rolls, Jack." He patted my back mockingly and walked away, leaving me alone in the shadow of the kitchen doors while his guests laughed aloud. I sat in the dim light, listening to the clatter of dishes and the muffled shouts of the kitchen staff. I did not care about the fancy food or the crystal glasses. For 35 years, I worked as a mechanical engineer in a manufacturing plant. I spent my life with grease under my fingernails, building things with my own 2 hands. My late wife Diane used to say my hands told the story of an honest, hard-working man. We lived simply, intentionally keeping our expenses low to save for the future. I never needed luxury to feel like a man. But I do care about respect. I care about the basic dignity owed to a father who gave up his own home and his own comfort so his daughter could have a better life. I looked over at the main table. Bradley was pouring champagne, acting like the king of the world with money he barely actually owned. He was a man obsessed with appearances, driven by an insatiable need to look wealthy, even if it meant drowning in debt. He thought, because I drove an old car and lived quietly, that I had nothing. He saw my faded suit and decided I was a pathetic, bankrupt old man who could be easily pushed aside and discarded. He spent the last 3 years slowly isolating Sarah from me, treating me like an embarrassing obligation that he had to tolerate. Every dismissive comment, every eye roll was designed to make me feel incredibly small. But a man who has spent his life working with heavy machinery knows exactly how to identify the breaking point of any given material, including his own patience. The waiter dropped a basket of cold rolls on my tiny table without making eye contact or saying a single word. Across the room, the loud, obnoxious chatter suddenly died down. I looked up and saw Bradley rising from his comfortable chair at the head of the main table. He grabbed a silver spoon and began tapping it against his crystal champagne flute, ringing out a sharp, commanding noise that demanded absolute silence. The entire room turned their undivided attention to him. He puffed out his chest, raising his expensive glass high into the air. Then his eyes drifted past his wealthy friends, past his silent wife, and locked dead onto me sitting alone in the dark corner. A malicious, cruel smirk spread across his face, and I knew instantly that the humiliation was only just beginning. I took a deep breath and braced myself for the incoming verbal attack. To my beautiful wife, Sarah, Bradley began, his voice booming across the dining room, ensuring everyone, including the waitstaff, stopped to listen. 5 years of marriage to the most incredible woman I have ever known, and a toast to the life we have built together. A life of success, of forward momentum, and of making smart choices. He paused, taking a dramatic sip of his champagne. His friends chuckled, raising their glasses. Then he pointed the stem of his flute directly at my corner table. You know, having my father-in-law here tonight is actually a wonderful gift. He serves as the perfect visual aid for what not to do with your life. A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the main table for a brief second, but Bradley plowed right through it. Seriously, guys, let us give a round of applause for Jack. He is the ultimate financial cautionary tale. A man who worked 35 years in a factory, broke his back every single day, and managed to squander his entire retirement to the point where he can barely afford the gas to drive his beat-up sedan across town. The stockbrokers and their wives erupted into genuine, mocking laughter. They looked over at me with pity and amusement. It takes a special kind of dedication to end up with absolutely nothing to your name at 70 years old, Bradley continued, pacing, slightly enjoying his audience. We keep him around to remind us why we hustle, why we invest. Because if you do not play the game right, you end up sitting by the kitchen doors, eating cold rolls while your family pays the tab. I looked over at Sarah, my own flesh and blood, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. She was staring intently at her silk lap napkin. She did not raise her head. She did not defend me. She just sat there, completely flushed with embarrassment, actively choosing her husband's cruel vanity over her father's dignity. The table laughed again, raising their glasses to toast my supposed failure. I did not flinch. I did not yell. I just sat there in the shadows, listening to the clinking of expensive crystal and the cruel laughter of people who knew absolutely nothing about the reality of my quiet life. My silence was my only solid shield against their truly endless, deeply ignorant mockery. I picked up a single piece of dry bread and took a slow, deliberate bite. The physical act of chewing kept me grounded. As the ambient noise of the restaurant swelled back up, my mind drifted away from their shallow cruelty and wandered back to my late wife, Diane. Diane had possessed a rare kind of wisdom. She always told me to let arrogant men dig their own graves with their mouths. She knew the truth about our life, and she knew the truth about my work. 30 years ago, working late nights in our modest garage, I had developed a highly specialized semiconductor patent. It was a tiny, incredibly complex component designed to regulate voltage in advanced circuit boards. When I first showed the blueprints to Bradley years ago, he had laughed right in my face. He literally tossed the folder back at me, calling it a worthless piece of trash that no modern tech company would ever look twice at. He told me to stop wasting my time on pointless hobbies and face reality. He was so blindingly arrogant that he never bothered to follow up. He never knew that I had kept the patent active, quietly renewing it every single year. He never knew that while he was busy showing off leased sports cars and buying expensive watches on credit to impress his shallow friends, I was quietly negotiating with a major technology conglomerate. I did not spend my retirement money on foolish things. I spent it quietly funding community projects and anonymously paying off medical debts for our old neighbors, deliberately keeping my visible checking account low. Bradley saw my modest lifestyle and immediately assumed it was born of desperate poverty rather than a conscious choice of a man who valued deep substance over superficial flash. The evening dragged on, moving from expensive steaks to overpriced desserts. Finally, the head waiter approached the head of the table carrying a sleek black leather folder. He respectfully handed it to Bradley. Bradley opened it, his eyes scanning the numbers. A wide theatrical grin stretched across his face. $3,000, Bradley announced loudly, waving the receipt in the air so everyone could clearly see it. Not bad for an anniversary dinner with my favorite people. Then he turned his chair fully around to face my isolated corner table. Hey, Jack, he called out, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. The bill just arrived. Are you going to chip in for your portion, or are we carrying you tonight, like usual? The entire table went completely silent, watching me like an animal in a cage. Bradley knew perfectly well that the checking account I used for daily expenses only held a few $100s. He had seen my bank statements when he snooped through my mail last month. He was intentionally trying to force me to publicly admit that I could not afford to pay. It was a calculated, extremely malicious move designed to entirely crush my proud spirit. I stared at Bradley, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I calmly wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate. Slowly, I pushed my chair back and stood up to my full height. I reached into my worn leather wallet, pulled out a single crisp $10 bill, and placed it flat on the table to tip my invisible waiter. Without uttering a single word to Bradley or my daughter, I turned my back on their luxurious party and walked quietly out the front door into the freezing, pouring rain. The cold rain soaked through my thin suit jacket before Bradley's luxury SUV aggressively pulled up to the curb. The passenger door swung open, and I climbed into the back seat, dripping water onto the pristine leather upholstery. Bradley slammed his foot on the accelerator before I could even properly close the door. The tires squealed against the wet asphalt as he merged recklessly into the heavy city traffic. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. For several minutes, the only sound inside the vehicle was the rhythmic beating of the windshield wipers and the tense, heavy breathing coming from the driver's seat. Then the dam broke. "You are so absolutely unbelievable," Jack Bradley shouted, his voice echoing sharply in the confined space. "You just had to make a huge scene, did you not? You just had to humiliate me in front of the managing partners of my firm." "I walked out quietly," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You were the one orchestrating a public spectacle at my expense. I simply refused to participate in your cruel little game." "My cruel game?" Bradley laughed bitterly, aggressively, tapping his expensive watch against the steering wheel. "I pay for your entire existence. I put food in your mouth. I put a roof over your head, and you repay my endless generosity by storming out like a petulant child and leaving a pathetic $10 bill on a table where men make more in a single day than you made in your entire worthless life." I watched the bright city lights blur through the rain-streaked window, refusing to rise to his angry bait. "You think you are so proud," Jack Bradley continued, his voice rising in pitch and anger. "You think your quiet dignity makes you superior to us? Well, let me tell you a very harsh truth. Pride does not pay the bills. I am sick and tired of carrying your dead weight around. If you ever embarrass me like that again, I will cut you off completely. I will stop paying for your groceries. I will cancel your phone plan. I will throw your meager belongings into the street and let you fend for yourself. You have absolutely nothing without me, old man. You are entirely dependent on my goodwill, and you just pushed my patience far beyond its absolute limit tonight." I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the passing streetlights, letting his cruel words hang in the heavy air. His arrogant threat about the roof over my head was the most deeply offensive part of his entire tirade. He conveniently chose to forget the undeniable reality of how they acquired that beautiful, sprawling, massive 4-bedroom luxury property in the first place. 5 years ago, when Sarah tearfully begged me for financial help because Bradley had ruined their credit with reckless investments, I made a massive personal sacrifice. I permanently sold my own comfortable, fully paid-off suburban home. I took the entire sum of $400,000 from that sale and handed it directly over to them for their down payment so they could secure that pristine real estate. In his incredibly inflated ego, Bradley had fully convinced himself that my contribution was just a simple, unrecorded gift from a foolish older man. He frequently boasted to his wealthy colleagues that he bought the massive estate entirely on his own merit. He selectively suffered from complete amnesia regarding the complex legal paperwork we signed during the chaotic closing process. Because I had insisted on protecting my hard-earned money, my lawyer ensured my name remained permanently attached to the property deed as a legal co-owner. Bradley never actually read the fine print. He just eagerly signed the documents so he could get the keys to his dream house. He honestly believed he held absolute power over my living situation. He truly thought he could simply throw me completely out into the cold, dark streets whenever my presence became inconvenient for his carefully curated social image. His blinding arrogance prevented him from realizing that he was literally driving me back to a house that I still legally owned. I leaned forward slightly, looking past the thick leather headrest to see my daughter sitting rigidly in the passenger seat. "Sarah," I said gently, keeping my voice perfectly steady despite the lingering tension filling the vehicle. "Are you really just going to sit right there silently and let your husband speak to your father this way?" Flinched visibly, her shoulders tightening as if she had just been physically struck. She slowly turned her head toward the back seat. Her eyes were wide, darting nervously toward Bradley before finally meeting my gaze. She looked absolutely terrified of causing any further conflict. "Just apologize, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling so softly I could barely hear her over the heavy rain hitting the windshield. "Please just tell him you are sorry so we can go home in peace. Do not make this worse." I stared silently at her pale, frightened face and felt a sudden, profound heartbreak. My bright, independent daughter was gone. I realized in that tragic moment that she was completely under Bradley's toxic control. She had been thoroughly manipulated into believing his emotional abuse was entirely normal, prioritizing his fragile ego over her own father's basic human dignity. I sat back in my seat, refusing to offer the apology they both desperately wanted to hear. The heavy silence resumed thicker and more suffocating than before. A few minutes later, the massive SUV swerved sharply off the wet street and bounded up the wide concrete driveway of the luxury estate. Bradley slammed his foot hard on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to an incredibly violent, jarring halt. He threw the transmission into park, aggressively twisted his body around to face me, and pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "Things are going to change starting tomorrow, old man." I stepped out of the heavy rain and into the grand foyer of the sprawling estate, leaving a trail of water on the pristine marble floor. Bradley stormed past me without another glance, his expensive leather shoes squeaking loudly as he headed straight toward the back hallway. I took off my soaked jacket and draped it slowly over a velvet chair. Sarah lingered near the front door, wringing her hands nervously before she finally approached me. She refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to stare at the wet droplets pooling at my feet. "Dad," she began, her voice quivering slightly as she attempted to project a false sense of calm. "You really have to understand where Bradley is coming from tonight. He is under an immense amount of pressure at the brokerage firm right now. He is managing massive portfolios, and the stress is just getting to him. He did not mean to sound so harsh in the car. He is just extremely worried about you." I looked at my daughter, feeling a deep, hollow ache in my chest as she effortlessly repeated the practiced lies her husband had clearly fed her. "Worried about me?" I asked softly, keeping my tone perfectly neutral to avoid sparking another pointless argument. How exactly is publicly humiliating me in front of strangers a sign of deep concern? Sarah sighed, reaching out to gently touch my forearm. She offered a fragile, unconvincing smile. He just wants to protect you, Dad. You have been getting so forgetful lately, and it scares him. Remember last week when you left the garden hose running, or when you misplaced your reading glasses? Bradley thinks you are struggling to manage on your own, and he feels the heavy burden of having to watch over you. He wants to make sure you are safe because you are getting older. It is just tough love, Dad. Please try to see it from his perspective. He is doing all of this because he cares about our family. I stood frozen in the grand entryway, listening to my own flesh and blood gaslight me with breathtaking ease. She was actively trying to convince me that my perfectly healthy mind was failing, weaponizing simple, everyday mistakes to justify her husband's blatant emotional abuse and suffocating control over my daily existence. I knew I had to handle this delicate situation with extreme caution tonight. I slowly nodded my head, adopting the weary posture of an exhausted, confused old man who lacked the energy to fight back. "Yes, Sarah," I replied, lowering my voice to sound completely defeated. "I suppose I have been a little absent-minded recently. Maybe Bradley is right to be concerned about my well-being." I patted her hand gently, playing the exact role they desperately needed me to play in order to maintain peace. She exhaled a long breath, visibly relieved that I was swallowing the lie without launching into another defensive argument. "You should go get some rest," she suggested softly, turning to walk up the sweeping wooden staircase toward their master suite. I remained alone in the quiet hallway, dropping the fragile, tired facade the absolute second she disappeared from my sight. My mind was not failing me. In fact, my cognitive abilities were sharper and more meticulously focused than they had ever been in my entire life. As a retired engineer, my brain was permanently wired to detect structural anomalies, and I could clearly see that the foundation of my son-in-law's carefully constructed world was cracking. As I quietly walked down the corridor toward my designated guest room, I passed the open doorway of his expansive home office. The polished glass doors were pushed wide open, revealing Bradley pacing furiously across the expensive imported rug. He had already discarded his tailored suit jacket and ripped off his silk tie. His dress shirt was completely soaked with nervous sweat around the collar, and he was violently running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, confident stockbroker who had proudly mocked my scuffed shoes just an hour ago at the restaurant. He was visibly unraveling right before my very eyes here tonight. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still in the shadowed hallway, keeping my breathing shallow so he would not notice my presence. From my concealed vantage point, I had an unobstructed view of the massive oak desk sitting in the center of the dark room. Bradley had carelessly left his primary desktop monitor glowing brightly in the dimly lit space. He was pacing back and forth, entirely consumed by his frantic phone conversation, aggressively muttering curses under his breath as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. I leaned forward very slightly, narrowing my eyes to focus on the large screen illuminating the space. The harsh blue light cast an eerie glow across the room, highlighting the bold, capitalized red letters flashing directly in the center of his email inbox. My engineering background had trained me to process visual information rapidly and accurately. Even from this significant distance, the stark warning message was impossible to misinterpret. I stared intently at the glowing display, feeling a sudden surge of clarity wash over me. The confusing puzzle of his hostile behavior finally started to make perfect, undeniable sense as I read the incredibly damning words displayed tonight. Right at the very top of his crowded inbox, an urgent message clearly displayed the terrifying phrase, "Margin call," in bold font. Below that terrifying subject line, I could distinctly read a final warning notice demanding the immediate repayment of a massive $400,000 leveraged debt. Bradley was not just simply stressed about his demanding job. He was completely broke, drowning in high-risk financial losses, and desperately searching for a quick way to save his sinking ship. Suddenly, his frantic desire to convince everyone that my mind was failing made dangerous, perfect, absolutely terrifying sense to me. The next morning arrived with a heavy, oppressive atmosphere hanging over the sprawling house. I woke up early, my mind still racing, from the terrifying discovery I had made in the dark hallway the night before. I dressed slowly, choosing a simple flannel shirt and slacks, preparing myself for whatever manipulation my son-in-law had planned for the day. When I finally made my way down the grand staircase and walked into the gleaming, sunlight-filled kitchen, Bradley was already sitting at the massive marble island. He was dressed impeccably, in a sharp navy blue suit, his hair perfectly slicked back, projecting the false image of a calm, successful financial expert. He was sipping a cup of black coffee, completely hiding the frantic, sweating mess of a man I had witnessed, pacing in his office just hours prior. As soon as I pulled out a stool to sit across from him, his fake, overly bright smile instantly appeared. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, densely packed stack of legal papers, sliding them smoothly across the polished marble surface toward me. "Good morning, Jack," he said, his voice dripping with an artificial, sugary sweetness that immediately set my nerves on edge. "I know we had a bit of a misunderstanding last night, but I want to make things right. Sarah and I were talking, and we decided it is time to upgrade your medical coverage. These are the enrollment forms for a new top-tier premium healthcare plan. It offers the absolute best senior care available in the entire state. But the enrollment window closes today, so I really need your immediate signature on these pages so I can submit them to the brokerage before my very important morning meetings begin right now." He clicked an expensive silver pen and placed it deliberately on top of the final page, tapping the exact spot where he needed my name. I looked down at the intimidating mountain of text. For a brief moment, a normal person might have felt grateful for such apparent generosity. But I was not a normal person, and I certainly was not the clueless, failing old man they were desperately trying to portray. I spent 35 years as a lead mechanical engineer, designing and reviewing complex blueprints, analyzing microscopic structural flaws, and reading through thousands of pages of dense technical specifications. My entire career was built on an uncompromising attention to minute details. I casually reached into my breast pocket, pulled out my reading glasses, and deliberately took my time putting them on. Bradley shifted his weight impatiently on his stool, letting out a short, irritated sigh as I picked up the first few pages. I began to scan the dense paragraphs, bypassing the bold, distracting headers that falsely advertised comprehensive medical benefits. My trained eyes immediately dropped down to the tightly packed fine print buried at the very bottom of the third page. The legal jargon was intentionally convoluted, designed to confuse and overwhelm, but the terrifying reality of the document was unmistakably clear to me. This was not a healthcare enrollment form. It was a sweeping, irrevocable power of attorney. Hidden beneath the deceptive medical terminology were specific aggressive clauses granting Bradley total, uncontested legal control over my finances, my property, and my personal autonomy. There was an entire section meticulously drafted to declare me legally incompetent to manage my own affairs, effectively stripping away every single one of my civil rights. If I put my signature on that dotted line, I would be voluntarily handing him the keys to the kingdom. He would gain immediate, unrestricted access to my bank accounts, and more importantly, he would acquire the absolute legal authority to force the immediate sale of the house I still co-owned. He was trying to steal my equity to cover his massive $400,000 leveraged debt, using a forged medical narrative to cleanly execute his completely desperate, entirely fraudulent financial rescue mission today. I kept my breathing slow and steady, ensuring my face revealed absolutely nothing to him, while I formulated my defense plan right then and there in total and complete silence. I knew I could not simply refuse to sign the documents outright. If I confronted him with my knowledge of his deceit, he would immediately realize that I was onto his scheme, and his desperate panic would only make him far more dangerous. I needed to buy myself precious time to formulate a proper counterattack. so I leaned heavily into the pathetic character he had created for me. I reached out with a trembling hand, allowing my fingers to shake violently as my fingertips brushed against the cold metal of his expensive silver pen. I let out a pained, fragile groan, curling my hand inward as if a sudden, intense wave of arthritis was seizing my joints. "I am so sorry, Bradley," I whispered, keeping my voice incredibly weak and shaky as I fumbled the pen, sending it clattering loudly onto the marble countertop. "My hands are just in terrible shape this morning. The arthritis flare-up is blindingly painful today, and I cannot grip anything tightly enough to write. You will just have to leave the paperwork here, and I promise I will try to sign it later this evening when the severe swelling finally goes down completely today." The friendly, accommodating mask melted right off his face in an instant, exposing the ruthless, panicked animal hiding underneath. His jaw clenched so hard I could hear his teeth grinding together in the quiet kitchen. He reached across the marble island and aggressively snatched the silver pen back. His dark eyes narrowing into a cold, menacing glare that betrayed his true intentions. He stared at me for a long, terrifying moment, entirely abandoning all pretense of being a caring son-in-law. "Fine," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "We will do this the hard way." Bradley stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the polished marble floor. He snatched the stack of legal documents and shoved them back into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a sharp, aggressive click. I remained seated, keeping my trembling hand resting on the countertop, maintaining the fragile facade of a helpless old man. Bradley walked over to the refrigerator and pulled out a heavy glass pitcher of ice water, slamming it down near my elbow. As he reached across me to grab a glass from the upper cabinet, his arm deliberately caught the edge of my smartphone resting on the island. With a swift, calculated motion, he knocked the device directly into the open pitcher. The heavy splash echoed in the tense kitchen. My phone sank instantly to the bottom, the screen flickering wildly before dying completely in the freezing water. "Oh, look at that," Bradley said, his voice entirely devoid of genuine apology. "How incredibly clumsy of me. But honestly, Jack, you barely know how to use that complicated thing anyway. It is probably for the best." Before I could even register the destruction of my only lifeline to the outside world, Bradley reached across the counter and swiftly snatched my car keys from the ceramic bowl where I always kept them. He slipped them deep into the tailored pocket of his navy suit pants. "What are you doing with those, Bradley?" I asked, allowing a hint of genuine alarm to seep into my voice. "Those are the keys to my sedan. You will not be needing them anymore," he replied coldly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Sarah and I had a long talk about this last night. Your vision is failing and your reaction times are dangerously slow. You are becoming a serious hazard to yourself and everyone else on the road. It is completely irresponsible for us to let you keep driving. We are officially taking away your driving privileges for your own protection. You can rely on us to drive you wherever you need to go from now on." I sat in stunned silence, watching him systematically strip away my physical independence in a matter of seconds. My car was my only means of escape, and my phone was my only way to call for help. He smiled wickedly, fully satisfied with his complete dominance over my daily life and absolute isolation. I was now completely isolated inside the very house I had helped purchase. Without my vehicle or my cell phone, I was effectively cut off from my former colleagues, my remaining friends, and my financial institutions. Bradley assumed this forced disconnection would break my spirit, leaving me entirely dependent on his non-existent mercy. He believed my meager checking account, the one he had been secretly monitoring and slowly siphoning funds from, was the entirety of my financial existence. He had absolutely no idea about my hidden high-yield patent account, securely managed by Mr. Sullivan at a prestigious Wall Street firm. I had intentionally not checked that specific account balance in several months, purposely letting the substantial royalty payments from the technology conglomerate quietly accumulate and compound in total secrecy. As an engineer, I understood the tremendous power of exponential growth, both in mathematics and in strategic planning. I had treated that account like a secure vault, an untouchable safety net that was steadily growing into a massive fortune while I lived my humble, unassuming life. Bradley was so blinded by his own towering debts and desperate schemes that he failed to consider I might possess resources beyond his narrow comprehension. He looked at my faded flannel shirt and saw a vulnerable target. He did not see a man who had spent 3 decades designing complex systems, a man who possessed the patience to let his investments mature without feeling the constant superficial urge to flaunt his wealth. His profound ignorance regarding my hidden assets was my greatest tactical advantage. I remained perfectly still on my stool, allowing him to revel in his temporary victory, knowing that my silent royalties were steadily transforming into a devastating financial weapon that I would eventually unleash upon him when the time finally arrives. Without another word, Bradley grabbed his leather briefcase and marched briskly out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps echoing sharply down the long hallway toward the front door. I waited until I heard the distinct rustle of his expensive wool overcoat being pulled from the hall closet. Moving quickly, I stood up from the marble island and walked directly over to the wall-mounted landline phone hanging near the pantry. It was an older model Sarah had insisted on keeping for emergencies. I lifted the heavy plastic receiver and pressed it firmly against my ear, fully expecting to hear the familiar steady hum of a dial tone. Instead, I was met with complete eerie silence. I frowned, pulling the device away from my face to inspect the keypad. My eyes followed the coiled wire down to the base unit attached to the wall. The thick gray cord connecting the phone to the primary wall jack had been deliberately and cleanly severed. A pair of sharp scissors or wire cutters had sliced straight through the thick plastic casing, leaving the frayed copper wires exposed and completely useless. My final remaining lifeline to the outside world had been meticulously and entirely destroyed. A heavy metallic click echoed loudly through the quiet hallway, immediately followed by the distinct sliding sound of the deadbolt sliding firmly into place. Bradley had locked the heavy oak front door from the outside, sealing us securely within the sprawling mansion. I slowly lowered the severed phone receiver back onto its useless hook and turned around. Sarah was standing frozen in the kitchen doorway, wearing her silk bathrobe, staring down at the pristine marble floor. Silent tears streamed continuously down her pale cheeks, yet she made absolutely no movement to stop her husband from trapping her own father inside. The heavy deadbolt clicked open late that afternoon, signaling Bradley's return to the house. I had spent the agonizing hours sitting in the quiet living room, watching Sarah nervously avoid my gaze while she pretended to read a magazine. Bradley marched through the front door, his expensive wool overcoat already tossed over his arm. He did not offer a greeting. Instead, he walked straight into the living room and pointed a firm finger at me. "Get up, Jack," he commanded, his voice sharp and utterly devoid of any respect. "You are moving your things right now." I slowly stood up from the armchair, maintaining my facade of a weak, confused old man. "Moving my things where, Bradley?" I asked softly. "To the basement," he replied without a single hint of hesitation or remorse. "Sarah and I have decided that we urgently need to convert your current guest room into a state-of-the-art home gym. My personal trainer requires a dedicated space for my morning workouts, and your temporary room is the only logical space with the correct square footage and lighting. Therefore, your extended stay on the second floor is officially over. You are going to pack up your clothes and whatever junk you brought with you, and you are going to carry it all down the stairs before dinner time." I stared at him, processing the sheer cruelty of his demand. The basement of this sprawling estate was completely unfinished. It was a cavernous, poorly insulated concrete bunker that smelled strongly of mildew and old dust. It lacked proper heating, running water, and basic human comfort. "You want me to sleep on a concrete floor in the freezing cold?" I asked, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. Bradley crossed his arms over his tailored chest, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I had the movers drop a perfectly good air mattress down there this morning," he stated coldly. "You should be immensely grateful that I am still allowing you to live under my roof at all, considering how much of a burden you have become to our daily lives." If you do not like the new accommodations, you are more than welcome to walk out the front door and find a homeless shelter. But as long as you are eating my food and taking up my space, you will sleep exactly where I tell you to. I carried my modest cardboard boxes down the steep wooden steps, feeling the temperature drop significantly with every descending footfall. The damp basement air chilled me straight to the bone, seeping through my thin flannel shirt as I placed my few possessions onto the harsh concrete floor. I knelt beside the deflated air mattress Bradley had carelessly tossed into the dark corner, surrounded by exposed pipes and cobwebs. As I opened the top flap of my heaviest box to begin unpacking my winter clothes, my fingers brushed against something smooth and beautifully polished. I reached deep inside and pulled out an intricately carved mahogany music box. It was the very first anniversary gift I had ever given to my late wife, Diane. I gently ran my thumb over the delicate floral engraving on the wooden lid, remembering her warm, encouraging smile. Resting directly beneath the heavy music box was a tightly rolled, yellowing parchment tube. I carefully untied the faded ribbon and unrolled the stiff paper across my knees. It was the original hand-drawn blueprint for the highly specialized semiconductor component I had patented over 30 years ago. I stared at the precise, meticulous ink lines I had drafted during countless sleepless nights in our old suburban garage. Diane had always believed in the profound value of those complex schematics, constantly reassuring me that my brilliant engineering mind would ultimately change our family's financial destiny one day. Sitting in that freezing, miserable subterranean prison, holding the physical proof of my past genius and Diane's unwavering faith, I felt a powerful, undeniable surge of absolute determination wash over me. I was not a weak, disposable victim. I was a highly skilled creator of complex systems, and I absolutely refused to let an arrogant, indebted broker mentally break me down tonight. I carefully repacked the precious blueprints and the wooden music box, sliding them safely beneath my folded winter coats to keep them hidden from prying eyes. Standing up, I began to slowly survey the dismal perimeter of my new living quarters. I walked over to the single narrow egress window positioned high up on the concrete wall near the ceiling. I pushed against the metal latch, hoping to allow some fresh air into the suffocating room. But the thick wooden frame had been heavily painted shut years ago, permanently sealing the glass in place. I was functionally trapped. However, as I stepped back from the sealed glass, my analytical eyes caught sight of a large rectangular aluminum air vent embedded directly into the ceiling panels right above my head. I recognized the architectural layout of the sprawling estate immediately. That specific metallic ductwork ran vertically through the floor joists, connecting my dark basement corner directly to the polished hardwood floorboards of Bradley's expansive home office, situated exactly one level above me. The thin aluminum grating effectively functioned as an acoustic funnel carrying sound waves downward with surprising crystalline clarity. I stood perfectly still in silence, staring intently at the grate. Suddenly, heavy, frantic footsteps began to pace rapidly back and forth across the wooden floorboards directly above me. The distinct sound of Bradley's desperate, trembling voice echoed downward through the narrow aluminum vent, completely unfiltered and unmistakably terrified. "Please, you have to give me until Friday," he pleaded loudly, his confident facade entirely shattered. "I know the margin call is due, but I can secure the remaining $400,000 in cash by this weekend. Do not send your guys to my property. I promise you will get every single penny of your money back very soon, I swear." I stepped silently onto a sturdy wooden crate left behind by the movers, elevating myself just enough to press my ear directly against the cold aluminum grating of the air vent. The frantic phone call had abruptly ended, replaced by the heavy thud of an expensive object slamming violently against the hardwood floor above my head. The heavy oak door of the home office burst open, and I heard Sarah enter the room, her voice trembling as she asked what was happening. Bradley immediately unleashed a torrent of blind fury, screaming at his wife with a vicious intensity I had never heard him use before. He paced the room like a caged animal, his heavy dress shoes pounding the floorboards just inches from my face. "I lost everything, Sarah," he shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. Every single penny we had in the savings account, the emergency fund, and the liquid investment portfolios is completely gone. Sarah gasped loudly, demanding to know how such a massive financial disaster could possibly occur overnight. Bradley confessed that he had secretly bypassed his brokerage firm compliance protocols to funnel their entire net worth into a highly volatile, completely unregulated cryptocurrency investment scheme promised by an anonymous online syndicate. When the digital market inevitably crashed last week, the entire platform vanished without a single trace, taking their entire financial future down with it. But it was much worse than just losing their savings. In a desperate, arrogant attempt to instantly win back his catastrophic losses and save his fragile ego, Bradley admitted he had actively sought out and borrowed an astronomical sum of $400,000 from a notorious underground lending operation. These were not corporate bankers who sent polite collection letters or negotiated reasonable payment plans. These were ruthless, dangerous individuals who operated far outside the boundaries of the law. "They do not care about my impressive job title or the zip code of this house," Bradley yelled, his voice echoing down the metal chute. "They care about their money, and they made it abundantly clear that if I do not deliver the entire principal plus their exorbitant interest by this coming Friday, they are going to send violent people directly to this property to brutally collect it in blood. We are completely and utterly out of time, and we have absolutely no other viable options available to us right now today." Sarah instantly began to weep loudly and uncontrollably, her fragile voice breaking deeply as she desperately pleaded with her husband to reconsider this horrific plan. "You absolutely cannot do this terrible thing to my father," she begged loudly, stepping closer to him. "He gave up his entire life savings to help us buy this beautiful home. It is completely evil to declare him insane just to steal his only remaining asset and throw him away into an awful institution." Bradley slammed his fist onto the solid desk, immediately silencing her protests with a brutal, terrifying ultimatum. "You listen to me very carefully right now," he snarled menacingly. "If you do not play along with this medical evaluation tomorrow, I will immediately file for divorce and completely vanish. I will leave you entirely alone to deal with those incredibly violent loan sharks by yourself when they eventually show up to brutally collect their money. You will lose this fancy house, your comfortable lifestyle, and possibly your life. You are going to stand there, smile at that doctor, and firmly corroborate every single lie I tell him about your father losing his frail mind. Is that absolutely perfectly clear to you tonight?" I held my breath as total silence consumed the room above me. Sarah finally let out a defeated, quiet sob, completely surrendering to his ruthless demands. Her absolute betrayal stung deeply, but it fueled the calculating fire burning inside my chest. Bradley aggressively paced back toward the center of the heavy hardwood floor, his heavy footsteps echoing down the metal duct directly into my ears. "The corrupt doctor arrives tomorrow at exactly 2 in the afternoon, Bradley stated coldly. "You better wipe those pathetic tears and go start packing up your useless dad's trash into cheap garbage bags right now." The cold concrete of the basement floor radiated a bitter chill that seeped directly through the thin plastic material of the air mattress Bradley had so generously provided. I lay there in the absolute pitch-black darkness long after the heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor above me had finally ceased. The ambient hum of the central heating unit clicked on, but none of that warm air ever reached this forgotten subterranean prison. I pulled my faded flannel coat tightly across my chest, shivering slightly, not from the dropping temperature, but from the profound adrenaline still coursing rapidly through my aging veins. The terrifying conversation I had just overheard through the aluminum air vent replayed on a continuous, inescapable loop inside my mind. My own daughter had completely surrendered her moral compass, agreeing to participate in a fraudulent psychiatric conspiracy, just to save her cowardly husband from the violent consequences of his own catastrophic greed. It was a staggering, deeply heartbreaking realization that threatened to entirely consume my spirit. To keep my mind grounded, I reached into the cardboard box resting beside my makeshift bed and gently traced my fingertips over the intricate mahogany carvings of the beautiful music box. I closed my eyes and vividly pictured Diane sitting at our old kitchen table balancing our modest checkbook with a stubby yellow pencil. We never had luxury vehicles or sprawling estates, but we possessed a profound, unshakable peace of mind because we never spent a single penny we did not honestly earn. Diane had always warned me about Bradley and his superficial charm when Sarah first brought him home. She saw right through his tailored suits and his boastful financial jargon, correctly identifying the deep, insecure void hiding just beneath his arrogant surface. "You cannot build a sturdy house on a foundation of sand, Jack," she used to whisper to me late at night. "One day the tide is going to rush in, and he is going to desperately try to drag our daughter down into the deep water with him." Her prophetic words echoed loudly in the silent basement. Bradley was actively drowning in an ocean of leveraged debt, and he was ruthlessly attempting to use my life as a raft to keep himself afloat. He believed my complete isolation and physical discomfort would swiftly break my mental resolve before the corrupt doctor arrived tomorrow afternoon. He was entirely wrong. Every freezing hour I spent lying on that deflated mattress only sharpened my absolute determination to utterly dismantle his pathetic stolen empire. I mentally rehearsed my calculated performance for the upcoming morning, meticulously planning every single clumsy step and confused stutter I would deploy to lower his guard. I needed him to feel completely blindly victorious. I needed his monumental ego to swell to its absolute maximum capacity so that he would become careless with his electronic devices. The long, miserable night gave way to a pale gray morning light creeping through the painted window. I was ready today. The very next morning, I slowly climbed the wooden stairs from the freezing basement and shuffled into the sunlit kitchen, fully prepared to deliver the performance of a lifetime. Bradley was already sitting at the marble island, aggressively tapping his manicured fingers against a ceramic coffee mug while staring at the morning news. Sarah stood by the sink, completely silent, her eyes red and severely swollen from crying throughout the long, miserable night. I intentionally dragged my feet across the hardwood floor, allowing my shoulders to slump heavily, as if the weight of confusion was physically pressing down on my fragile spine. "Good morning, Richard," I mumbled deliberately, using the name of Bradley's older brother, as I awkwardly pulled out a heavy wooden stool. "Are we expecting rain today?" Bradley immediately stopped tapping his mug. He slowly turned his head to look at me, a cruel, triumphant smile slowly spreading across his arrogant face. He shot a highly meaningful, victorious glance toward Sarah, silently confirming his sinister narrative that my mind was rapidly deteriorating. "My name is Bradley Jack," he replied loudly, using the slow, patronizing tone one might reserve for a dim-witted child. I reached for a tall glass of orange juice resting near the center of the island. With a perfectly calculated tremor in my right hand, I intentionally clipped the edge of the heavy glass. The cold orange liquid spilled rapidly across the pristine white marble countertop, dripping steadily onto the immaculate hardwood floor below. "Oh, goodness me," I stammered frantically, patting the spreading puddle with my bare hands to amplify my supposed helplessness. "I am so incredibly clumsy this morning. My poor mind is just swimming in a terrible thick fog today." Instead, Bradley did not even bother to offer me a paper towel. He smiled. Behind my carefully constructed mask of senility, my internal monologue remained incredibly icy and methodically calculated. While my son-in-law mistakenly believed he was successfully breaking me down, I was actively studying his every single move with the precision of a seasoned engineer analyzing a flawed mechanical system. I knew absolutely everything about his precarious situation after pressing my ear against the basement air vent the previous night. I knew his arrogant stockbroker persona was a complete fabrication built entirely on mountains of dangerous leveraged debt. I knew he had recklessly lost his life savings in an unregulated cryptocurrency scam. Most importantly, that I knew that he desperately owed $400,000 to incredibly violent individuals who would not hesitate to collect their money in blood by this coming Friday. The man sitting across from me was not a powerful, wealthy elite. He was a terrified, desperate animal backed securely into a dark corner, willing to sacrifice his own father-in-law to save his worthless skin. As Sarah finally stepped forward with a damp rag to clean up the orange juice I had intentionally spilled, Bradley aggressively pushed his heavy stool backward. He let out a loud, dramatic sigh of absolute disgust, visibly demonstrating his profound lack of patience for my manufactured incompetence. He casually tossed his highly expensive encrypted tablet directly onto the dry side of the marble countertop, completely disregarding basic security protocols in his own arrogant home. "I am going to use the restroom," he announced sharply, turning his back on us without a second glance. "I need 5 minutes of complete peace before dealing with this massive headache anymore today." I kept my chin tucked low against my chest, pretending to stare blankly at my empty hands, but my sharp eyes immediately darted toward the electronic device he had carelessly abandoned on the sleek marble island. His blind arrogance was his greatest, most fatal weakness. He honestly believed I was far too mentally degraded to comprehend the basic functions of modern technology. He had no idea that I spent 3 decades designing the intricate microprocessors that fundamentally powered devices exactly like his tablet. He had no idea that I was quietly planning a devastating counterattack to save myself. I simply needed to access his secure email to gather the ultimate proof of his malicious psychiatric plot right now, completely unnoticed and entirely undetected today. Sarah immediately turned around and walked over to the large stainless steel refrigerator, deeply distracted by her own silent tears and mounting anxiety regarding the violent loan sharks. With my daughter completely facing away from the marble island, I slowly shifted my body weight entirely toward the abandoned tablet. I did not dare to physically touch the device just yet. Instead, I carefully leaned my head forward, utilizing the bright natural morning sunlight streaming directly through the massive kitchen windows to brilliantly illuminate the dark, glossy surface of the electronic screen. My eyes scanned the smooth glass with absolute methodical precision. Bradley was a man who obsessively applied thick, expensive moisturizing lotions to his hands every single morning. Because of this vain personal habit, he consistently left a highly distinct, easily readable trail of oily fingerprints across his touchscreen. I studied the 4 prominent, overlapping circular smudges clustered near the bottom center of the device. The visual sequence was incredibly obvious to a trained observer. The heavy grease marks directly corresponded to the exact numeric digits 198 and 7. It was Sarah's birth year. His security code was truly pathetic, highly predictable, and entirely weak for an expert. I firmly memorized those 4 specific numbers just as the heavy wooden bathroom door clicked open down the hall. I instantly slumped my shoulders forward again, returning my blank, vacant gaze directly to the spilled orange juice on the floor. Bradley strutted back into the kitchen, hastily grabbing his tablet off the smooth marble counter without suspecting a single thing at all. "I am leaving the house for exactly 1 hour to make some final official arrangements for your permanent departure today," he announced coldly. "Do not cause any more stupid trouble while I am gone, you pathetic old man." The heavy oak front door slammed shut, sending a faint vibration through the pristine marble floor. I stood still for 2 minutes, listening intently to the muffled sound of Bradley's luxury SUV engine roaring to life and speeding aggressively down the long driveway. Sarah had already retreated upstairs to the master suite, her quiet sobs fading into the distance. The house was finally silent. I dropped the hunched, pathetic posture I had been holding all morning and straightened my spine. Rolling my shoulders back, I walked purposefully out of the kitchen and into the grand foyer. There, resting carelessly on the polished mahogany console table right next to the front door, was Bradley's encrypted tablet. In his arrogant, frantic rush to leave the house and finalize his malicious plans, he had completely forgotten the device. I picked up the cold, sleek tablet, my hands perfectly steady. The screen illuminated instantly as my fingers brushed the side button, prompting me for the 4-digit security passcode. I did not hesitate. I did not second-guess my observation from earlier in the kitchen. Relying entirely on the distinct pattern of greasy fingerprints I had memorized, I deliberately pressed the glowing numbers on the smooth glass display. 1, 9, 8, 7. The digital lock clicked silently, and the home screen opened immediately, granting me completely unrestricted access to his entire digital life. I quickly navigated past his chaotic calendar and opened his primary email application. My engineering background had taught me to process vast amounts of complex data swiftly and efficiently, looking for structural anomalies and hidden patterns. I did not care about his superficial social correspondence or his generic daily newsletters. I needed hard, undeniable evidence of his criminal conspiracy against my autonomy and my personal freedom. I systematically bypassed his primary inbox and went straight to his archived folders and deleted messages, fully aware that desperate men always try to cover their tracks but rarely do a thorough job. I sat down on the velvet bench in the hallway, keeping my ears sharply tuned to any sounds from the second floor, where my daughter was currently hiding. The tablet screen glowed brightly in the dim foyer, illuminating the absolute depths of his depravity. I began to methodically scroll through the dense list of recent communications, searching for any names or subjects that matched the terrifying phone call I had overheard prior. It did not take me very long to find exactly what I was looking for. Buried deep within a hidden folder labeled Medical Legal Documents was a long, highly incriminating email chain between Bradley and a man named Dr. Evans. I opened the messages and read through them with growing disgust. Dr. Evans was not a legitimate practicing medical professional. He was a thoroughly corrupt, disgraced psychiatrist who had explicitly agreed to visit the house today and officially diagnose me with severe, irreversible dementia in exchange for a massive cash bribe. Bradley had meticulously outlined the entire false narrative they would use to legally strip away my human rights and force me into a state-run psychiatric facility by the end of the week. But the medical conspiracy was not the only horrifying secret hidden on that device. As I continued to dig through his personal financial spreadsheets, I discovered a series of automated, recurring bank transfers that made my blood run entirely cold. For the past 18 months, Bradley had been systematically skimming exactly $50 every single week directly from my basic, visible checking account. He had quietly set up the fraudulent transfers to resemble routine pharmacy charges, banking on the cruel assumption that I was far too old and confused to ever notice the missing funds. He was stealing from my meager grocery money to secretly fund his lavish fake lifestyle while simultaneously complaining about the heavy burden of supporting me. The sheer audacity of his petty theft was absolutely breathtaking. He had looked me in the eye daily, demanding endless gratitude for providing a roof over my head while actively robbing me completely and totally blind. It was a staggering level of sociopathic entitlement that solidified my resolve to absolutely destroy his entire stolen empire today. I backed out of the banking application and opened his encrypted messaging platform, needing to fully understand the absolute depth of his current financial crisis. The terrifying messages there were absolutely not written in polite, professional, corporate language. They were stark, brutal, and thoroughly filled with highly explicit threats of extreme physical violence from the underground loan sharks he had foolishly entangled himself with. I opened the most recent message thread and finally discovered the massive, undeniable truth that was actively driving his frantic behavior today. Bradley did not just owe the initial $400,000 he had recklessly borrowed to cover his catastrophic cryptocurrency losses. With the exorbitant predatory interest rates and the severe late penalties multiplying daily, the final non-negotiable payoff amount had skyrocketed to exactly $1,200,000. He needed $1.2 million by Friday to essentially save his own miserable life, and he was actively planning to steal every single penny of that astronomical sum directly from the forced sale of my house. The terrifying, genuine scale of his absolute impending financial ruin was now completely and undeniably laid bare before me in the quiet hallway this very morning. I stared at the terrifying numbers glowing on the screen, finally possessing all the concrete evidence I needed to completely destroy his malicious plot and secure my own permanent freedom. I quickly tapped the screen to close the messaging application and thoroughly clear the digital history. Just as my finger brushed the smooth glass to finally lock the device, the distinct heavy crunch of expensive tires rolling rapidly over the gravel driveway shattered the silence of the large house. Bradley had unexpectedly returned very early today. The heavy front door handle began to jiggle aggressively right behind my frozen back. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, sending a surge of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. Bradley was fumbling with his large ring of keys on the other side of the thick oak wood, loudly muttering frustrated curses as the metal scraped against the deadbolt. I had mere seconds to execute the most critical maneuver of my entire life. I could not simply lock the screen and walk away. If I did not send this urgent communication right now, I would be permanently trapped in his sinister web, heavily sedated, in a corrupt psychiatric ward by tomorrow afternoon. My hands, which I had carefully forced to tremble during breakfast, were now as steady as solid stone. I swiped up from the bottom of the glowing display, rapidly minimizing his terrifying financial spreadsheets and completely ignoring the active messaging applications that contained his horrifying threats. I swiftly opened a blank internet browser, tapping the private incognito mode to ensure absolutely zero digital footprint would remain on his personal device after I finished. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard with the refined precision of a seasoned engineer navigating a complex control panel. I quickly typed in the highly secure direct web portal address for the elite Wall Street financial firm that managed my hidden assets. I had memorized this specific address decades ago, knowing that one day I might need to access my private wealth from an unsecured terminal in an absolute emergency. The login screen appeared instantly, bathing my tense face in a stark white glow. I inputted my long username and the complex password I had intentionally never written down anywhere. The system verified my credentials, immediately granting me direct access to an encrypted, highly secure internal messaging system designed specifically for the firm and its most exclusive clients. I did not waste a single second navigating through the portal to check my current account balances or review the recent dividend statements. I knew the semiconductor patent royalties had been aggressively compounding for months, untouched and silent. I clicked directly onto the Priority Communication tab, opening a blank urgent message addressed solely to my dedicated private wealth manager. The front door deadbolt finally turned with a heavy, terrifying click. I took a deep, silent breath and began to type my final defense right now, fully prepared to reclaim everything that was rightfully mine today, without fail at last. Mr. Sullivan, I typed, rapidly bypassing all customary pleasantries in favor of absolute efficiency. I require immediate, undeniable verification that the technology conglomerate has successfully finalized the complete buyout of my semiconductor patent. Please officially confirm that the final royalty payments have fully cleared the institutional holding periods and that my liquid account balances reflect the entire updated sum. I need you to print out a physical, certified copy of my current portfolio statement, specifically highlighting the complete financial total without any omissions whatsoever. I paused for a fraction of a second, hearing the heavy brass door handle physically depress. My fingers struck the glowing digital glass with even greater urgency, formulating the most important instruction of the entire message. Furthermore, my current living situation has abruptly become incredibly hostile and financially dangerous. I am currently facing a severe, highly coordinated legal threat against my personal autonomy. I absolutely require your immediate physical presence to intercept this malicious action. You must cancel your afternoon appointments and come directly to my current residential address tomorrow. Do not arrive early and absolutely do not arrive late. I need you to pull into my driveway at exactly 2:55 in the afternoon. This precise timing is completely non-negotiable for my personal safety. Please bring the certified financial documents and prepare yourself to execute an immediate comprehensive audit of this property deed directly upon your arrival. I intend to force a permanent sale. I am relying entirely on your absolute discretion and your prompt arrival to secure my complete freedom from this disastrous environment. Acknowledge receipt of this urgent directive immediately. I reviewed the brief demanding paragraphs, knowing my trusted wealth manager would instantly recognize the profound severity of my highly unusual demanding tone today right now without any hesitation or delay. Without a single moment of hesitation, my thumb forcefully struck the bright blue send button located at the top corner of the screen. The encrypted portal displayed a brief, reassuring green checkmark, confirming the message had successfully departed the secure server. The heavy oak front door was now swinging open, the hinges groaning loudly in the quiet foyer. I rapidly tapped the small exit icon, instantly closing out of the secure messaging system. With 2 quick, incredibly practiced motions, I navigated directly to the browser settings and entirely wiped the temporary history, completely obliterating any remaining digital evidence of my clandestine session. I closed the incognito window swiftly, restoring the tablet to its original state, leaving Bradley's chaotic financial spreadsheets prominently displayed exactly as I had originally found them. I stood up from the kitchen stool, moving with a fluid, calculated silence. I carefully placed the expensive electronic device back onto the polished marble island, ensuring its physical position matched my precise memory. The heavy front door slammed shut, sending a loud, startling echo bouncing sharply down the long, shadowed corridor, just as I pulled my hand completely away from the sleek glass surface, standing perfectly still right now today. I immediately dropped my shoulders forward, instantly reverting to the pathetic, hunched posture of a hopelessly confused senior citizen. Bradley aggressively stomped into the kitchen, angrily loosening his expensive silk tie. His frantic dark eyes instantly darted toward the polished marble island. He froze, his paranoid gaze locking onto my fragile stance. He took 2 heavy, menacing steps forward, completely ignoring his damp wool coat slipping from his arm. His jaw tightened in absolute fury as he stared at me. "What are you doing near my tablet, old man?" he demanded coldly, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated, dangerous suspicion. I shrank back against the cold edge of the marble island, letting my hands shake visibly as I raised them in a gesture of complete surrender. "I was just looking for a paper napkin." "Bradley," I stammered, making sure my voice trembled with the perfect amount of manufactured fear. "I spilled a little bit of my water earlier, and I did not want to leave a mess on your beautiful counter. I thought maybe there was a napkin holder hiding behind your electronic device." Bradley did not believe a single word of my pathetic excuse. He closed the distance between us in 2 massive strides, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage and mounting paranoia. He raised his hands and violently shoved me backward. His heavy palms struck my shoulders with enough brutal force to send me stumbling clumsily across the kitchen floor. I caught my balance against the stainless steel refrigerator, letting out a sharp gasp, as if the physical impact had genuinely terrified my fragile old bones. Bradley completely ignored my stumbled retreat. He lunged forward and snatched the expensive tablet directly off the stone surface, his eyes wide with frantic desperation. He hurriedly tapped the dark screen, his breathing heavy as he anxiously waited for the digital display to illuminate his chaotic financial spreadsheets. I watched him closely from my submissive position across the room, tracking the exact micro-expressions flickering across his sweating face. He aggressively swiped his thick finger across the glass, navigating rapidly through his open applications to ensure his incriminating messages and disastrous banking details remained exactly where he had originally left them. He checked his browser history, unaware that my incognito session had already vanished without leaving a single trace behind. I kept my chin tucked firmly against my chest, playing the role of the intimidated senior citizen who simply could not comprehend the magnitude of the technological secrets resting right there in his son-in-law's greedy hands. I knew that his towering arrogance would blind him to the truth. He honestly believed I lacked the cognitive capacity to even unlock the device, let alone orchestrate a coordinated counterattack involving a prestigious Wall Street wealth management firm. He spent 3 agonizing minutes frantically refreshing his secure screens, his shoulders tight with immense stress, desperately searching for any slight indication of a security breach that simply was not there. Satisfied that his dark digital secrets were completely secure, Bradley finally exhaled a long, heavy breath of immense relief. The frantic panic gradually drained away from his sweating face, quickly replaced by his signature mask of profound, disgusting superiority. He slowly lowered the expensive tablet back onto the marble island, letting out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed coldly through the pristine kitchen. "You really are just a pathetic, bumbling idiot now, are you not, Jack?" he sneered viciously, his tone laced with absolute venom and unmistakable contempt. He forcefully yanked open a wooden drawer beneath the kitchen sink and aggressively pulled out a thick, heavy black plastic garbage bag. He marched across the room and violently threw the crinkling plastic directly against my chest. "Start packing your clothes right now," he commanded, his voice dropping into a sinister, authoritative register. "And do not even bother carefully folding your best tailored jackets or your old formal trousers. You definitely will not need those fancy suits where you are going tomorrow afternoon." The harsh reality of his sinister eviction plan hung heavily in the tense air between us. He genuinely thought he was sending me away to rot in a miserable state-funded psychiatric facility for the rest of my natural life. He firmly believed he had outsmarted everyone successfully, maneuvering me into a permanent medicated exile while he ruthlessly planned to steal my house to pay off his highly dangerous debt. I clutched the cheap plastic garbage bag tightly in my hands, maintaining my terrified facade while secretly marveling at his astounding foolishness. His arrogant confidence was built entirely on a fragile foundation of desperate, incredibly temporary, and highly transparent lies. The very man he was treating like garbage was about to shatter his world and firmly bring him down. I slowly lifted my head and shifted my gaze past his looming shoulder, looking directly at my daughter. Sarah was standing quietly in the wide hallway, just outside the kitchen, having rushed downstairs when she heard the loud commotion of her husband's unexpected arrival. This was her final opportunity to stand up and do the right thing. I desperately pleaded with her silently, staring deep into her tear-filled eyes, offering her one absolute last chance to fiercely defend her own father against this horrific, unspeakable betrayal. She knew exactly what Bradley was planning to do to me, and she knew it was fundamentally entirely wrong. For a brief, agonizing second, Sarah opened her trembling mouth, as if she might finally speak the actual truth and stop this absolute madness. But then Bradley sharply turned his head, shooting her a dark, menacing glare of absolute control. The courage instantly completely vanished from her pale face. She closed her mouth tightly, hung her head in total shame, and deliberately looked away from me, cowardly staring at the floorboards instead. In that precise, devastating moment, the final lingering shreds of my paternal hesitation permanently died. My broken heart hardened into impenetrable stone. I slowly lowered my gaze back to the crumpled black plastic garbage bag resting loosely in my trembling hands. I felt a powerful, undeniable surge of absolute clarity and profound strength rushing through my entire body right now. I was no longer a confused, dependent victim trapped within these cold, hostile walls today. I slowly looked back up at my highly arrogant son-in-law, allowing a remarkably cold, calculating smile to finally break through my exhausted facade. "Do not worry, Bradley," I stated with icy, terrifying precision. "I am currently packing exactly what I will need for tomorrow afternoon." The grandfather clock in the grand foyer chimed exactly twice, signaling the precise arrival of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Right on cue, the heavy brass knocker sounded against the oak front door. Bradley practically sprinted down the hallway to answer it, his face flushed with a toxic mixture of mounting debt anxiety and malicious anticipation. He ushered a man into the living room. This was Dr. Evans. He did not look like a respectable medical professional. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that was far too flashy, and his hair was slicked back with an excessive amount of strong-smelling pomade. He carried a slim leather briefcase and wore a highly dismissive, incredibly arrogant smirk that perfectly mirrored my son-in-law's terrible attitude. Sarah hovered nervously near the kitchen entrance, her arms wrapped tightly around her own torso, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the room. Bradley gestured toward the velvet armchair, where I sat quietly, with my hands folded in my lap. Dr. Evans strolled over and stood directly above me, invading my personal space with profound disrespect. He did not offer his hand in greeting. He did not introduce himself with any measure of professional courtesy. Instead, he pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket and began clicking it rhythmically, staring down at me as if I were a defective piece of machinery. "Well, now let us get right down to business today," Dr. Evans said, his tone dripping with patronizing condescension. He leaned in closer, his cheap cologne burning my nostrils. "Tell me something simple, Pop. Do you happen to know exactly what year it is right now? Or maybe you can tell me what you had for breakfast this morning, if you can even remember that far back, old man." I slowly raised my head and locked my eyes directly onto his arrogant face. I did not blink. I let the pathetic, trembling facade vanish completely, allowing my true, sharp intellect to shine through my steady gaze. "I know that the current year is 2026, I stated with absolute terrifying clarity. "I also know that engaging in a coordinated conspiracy to falsify medical records for financial gain is a direct violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 1035, which constitutes criminal healthcare fraud. Such a severe federal offense carries a mandatory penalty of up to 10 years in a federal penitentiary." I watched the condescending smirk instantly evaporate from Dr. Evans' face. His clicking silver pen stopped mid-motion, hovering nervously in the quiet air. Bradley stiffened near the doorway, suddenly realizing that the narrative he had so carefully constructed was rapidly falling apart. I shifted my gaze toward the small ceramic mug resting on the glass coffee table beside my velvet chair. Furthermore, I continued, my voice echoing with the calm, authoritative precision of a seasoned mechanical engineer, delivering a final structural analysis. "I know that the ceramic coffee cup sitting right there on your lovely glass table is primarily composed of silicon dioxide and aluminum oxide fired at approximately 2000 degrees Fahrenheit to achieve its vitrified state. I also know that the black liquid inside it contains exactly 100 milligrams of caffeine, alongside thousands of distinct chemical compounds, including chlorogenic acid and trigonylene. I know all of this because my cognitive functions are operating at peak efficiency, far beyond the intellectual capacity of any corrupt, pathetic charlatan who accepts illegal bribes to ruin innocent lives." The room plunged into a suffocating, deeply uncomfortable silence. Dr. Evans visibly swallowed hard, a thick bead of nervous sweat suddenly forming along his receding hairline. He took a cautious half-step backward, physically retreating from the intense, unyielding power radiating from my steady posture. He slowly turned his head to look at Bradley, his eyes wide with rising panic. "This man is not suffering from any form of dementia," he whispered frantically, his professional composure entirely shattered by my display. "He is perfectly lucid. I cannot legally sign this medical declaration. If I put my signature on this document, I could lose my medical license forever and end up in a federal prison." Bradley completely panicked as he watched his entire malicious scheme unraveling before his very eyes. The dangerous deadline to pay the violent loan sharks was rapidly approaching, and my massive house equity was his absolute only remaining lifeline today. He lunged urgently across the spacious living room, frantically reaching into the interior pocket of his tailored navy suit jacket. He aggressively pulled out a thick, unmarked manila envelope, heavily stuffed with $100 bills. He grabbed Dr. Evans by the forearm and physically forced the bulging envelope directly into the trembling physician's sweaty hand. "I do not care what you think. You heard. Bradley hissed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. "This man is out of his mind. He is hallucinating complex federal statutes. You are going to sign that declaration of incompetence right now, or I will make absolutely sure you never practice medicine in this city ever again. I am paying you $50,000 in untraceable cash to do this one very simple job. Take the dirty money, sign the paperwork, and let the medical transport van take him away. You promised me you would handle this problem today. Do it right now without any further delay." Dr. Evans stared down at the incredibly thick envelope resting heavily in his shaking hand. The sheer volume of illegal cash was simply too massive for his corrupt morals to resist. He swallowed his rising fear, pulled out his silver pen, and quickly scribbled his signature across the bottom of the fraudulent medical declaration. Bradley immediately snatched the official document from the coffee table. He threw his head back and let out a victorious, truly wicked laugh that echoed loudly through the grand living room, firmly believing he had just finally won his absolute ultimate permanent freedom from ruin today. With that fraudulent signature officially securing his twisted victory, Bradley wasted absolutely no time executing the next phase of his cruel eviction. He folded the forged medical declaration with trembling, eager hands and shoved it safely into his tailored suit jacket, his eyes gleaming with a toxic mixture of relief and absolute malice. He turned on his heel and marched directly toward the heavy wooden door leading down to the freezing basement. I remained seated in the velvet armchair, listening to the loud, aggressive thuds of his expensive leather shoes pounding against the wooden steps as he descended into my temporary prison. A few moments later, he emerged carrying the cheap black plastic garbage bags I had packed the night before. He did not carry them with any measure of care. He dragged them violently across the pristine marble floor of the grand foyer, the thin plastic stretching and tearing slightly against the polished stone surface. He kicked the heavy oak front door wide open, letting a gust of crisp afternoon air sweep into the tense house, and hauled my meager belongings out onto the expansive concrete porch. I stood up slowly from the armchair and followed him outside, maintaining my steady, calculated silence. Bradley dropped the heavy bags onto the hard pavement with a loud, disrespectful thud. The sudden impact caused the torn plastic of the largest bag to split entirely open, spilling a few of my carefully folded flannel shirts onto the cold ground. Right on top of the pile, completely exposed to the afternoon sun, was the delicate silver frame holding the cherished photograph of my late wife. Bradley stared down at Diane and her smiling face for a long, agonizing moment. Instead of simply pushing the frame back into the torn bag, he reached down and purposefully snatched the silver medal in his greedy hand. He looked at me, his face twisting into a hideous, mocking sneer. "You certainly will not be needing any sentimental reminders of your pathetic past in the psychiatric ward. Jack," he spat viciously. With a swift, incredibly violent motion, he turned around and forcefully threw the beautiful framed photograph directly into the large, filthy metal trash can sitting near the edge of the manicured lawn. The glass shattered loudly against the bottom of the dirty bin, sending sharp, jagged fragments flying into the surrounding lush green grass right now today. Any normal man would have completely lost his temper in that agonizing moment. Any other father would have screamed loudly, cursed his arrogant son-in-law, and physically lunged forward to viciously attack the deeply disrespectful monster standing on the porch. But I am not an ordinary man, prone to completely unhinged emotional outbursts. I spent my entire adult life meticulously designing highly complex mechanical systems that required absolute emotional detachment and profound rational focus to function perfectly. I knew that reacting with blind anger would only validate the fraudulent psychiatric document currently burning a hole in Bradley's tailored pocket. Instead of shouting, I calmly walked down the concrete steps toward the filthy metal bin. I reached my hands deep into the dark, foul-smelling container, carefully avoiding the dangerously sharp shards of broken glass scattered across the bottom. I gently retrieved the dented silver frame, holding it securely against my chest, as if I were rescuing a precious, fragile child from a burning building. I used the clean cuff of my flannel shirt to slowly, tenderly wipe a thick smudge of wet dirt away from Diane's beautiful, smiling face. Looking at her warm eyes, I remembered the countless times she had patiently reminded me that true strength is never demonstrated through loud, chaotic violence, but rather through quiet, unwavering endurance during the darkest storms. I held on to her memory, allowing her profound wisdom to completely calm my racing heartbeat today. Without uttering a single word of complaint or protest, I slowly stood up straight and pulled my left sleeve back to check the face of my reliable stainless steel wristwatch. The metallic hands clearly indicated the precise time. It was exactly 2:54 in the afternoon. My meticulously planned salvation was currently less than 60 seconds away. Bradley did not appreciate my profound stoic silence. He had desperately wanted me to cry, beg, or violently lash out, so he could effortlessly justify his completely fabricated psychiatric narrative to his silent, weeping wife hovering inside the grand foyer. When I simply stood there, peacefully clutching the tarnished silver frame, his mounting frustration boiled over into unacceptable physical aggression. He stomped aggressively down the concrete steps, closing the short distance between us in 3 massive, angry strides. He aggressively grabbed my upper arm, his thick fingers digging painfully deep into my aging muscles through the soft flannel fabric. "It is entirely over for you, old man," he sneered, his hot breath smelling strongly of bitter espresso and mounting fear. "You have absolutely nothing left in this world." A cheap rust-covered medical transport van slowly rumbled down the quiet suburban street, its heavily tinted windows completely obscuring the driver inside. The depressing vehicle pulled abruptly against the curb, idling loudly, right at the absolute edge of his manicured property line. Bradley tightened his brutal grip on my arm, forcefully yanking my entire body forward toward the waiting, miserable mechanical beast resting quietly on the dark pavement today, right now. Just as my worn shoes scraped against the rough asphalt of the busy street, a deep, powerful engine purr completely drowned out the pathetic rattling of the waiting medical van. A massive, incredibly sleek black Mercedes Maybach smoothly turned the sharp corner of the affluent suburban neighborhood. The stunning luxury vehicle glided forward with absolute, undeniable authority, its highly polished chrome accents catching the bright afternoon sunlight. Without any hesitation whatsoever, the imposing car swerved sharply, parking horizontally across the wide entrance and completely, totally blocking Bradley's massive concrete driveway from access right now, today, in this exact moment. The brutal grip on my arm vanished instantly as Bradley physically recoiled from the edge of the street. His expensive leather shoes scraped loudly against the concrete driveway as he stumbled backward in a sudden state of absolute blinding panic. The sheer size and imposing presence of the black vehicle triggered an immediate and terrifying realization within his guilty mind. He did not see a luxury car. He saw the violent, uncompromising consequences of his astronomical $1.2 million debt arriving directly at his pristine doorstep today. His breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid, his chest heaving under his tailored suit jacket as his arrogant, domineering posture completely evaporated into pure, unadulterated cowardice. He scrambled frantically up the short flight of stairs toward the grand entrance of the house, his eyes darting wildly between the tinted windows of the Maybach and the quiet suburban street behind it. Sarah was still standing near the heavy oak door, her arms wrapped defensively around her own torso, watching the bizarre scene unfold with a mixture of deep confusion and mounting fear. Without a single ounce of masculine pride or husbandly protection, Bradley aggressively grabbed his wife by the shoulders and forcefully pulled her directly in front of his trembling body. He actively used the woman he supposedly loved as a physical human shield against the imaginary loan sharks he believed were coming to brutally end his miserable life right now. He crouched low behind her slender frame, his fingers digging painfully into her silk blouse, his face completely drained of all its color. He was trembling so violently that Sarah began to shake along with him. The cruel, manipulative monster who had just successfully bribed a corrupt medical professional to steal my freedom, was now whimpering audibly like a frightened child hiding from dangerous monsters in the dark. I remained perfectly still on the manicured lawn, clutching the dirt-smeared photograph of Diane tightly against my chest, watching my son-in-law entirely humiliate himself before my very eyes. His absolute lack of moral courage was put on full, undeniable display for the entire neighborhood to witness. The quiet suburban afternoon was pierced only by the low, steady hum of the massive luxury vehicle idling perfectly across the blocked driveway, waiting patiently to deliver my ultimate and absolute salvation. The heavy driver's side door of the imposing vehicle swung open with a smooth, silent grace. A man wearing a dark chauffeur uniform stepped out onto the pristine pavement, swiftly adjusting his peaked cap before walking purposefully around the front grille of the pristine automobile. He stopped beside the rear passenger compartment, reaching out with white-gloved hands to pull the gleaming chrome handle. The door glided open, and Mr. Sullivan finally stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight. He was the absolute embodiment of elite Wall Street sophistication and refined, quiet power. He wore an impeccably tailored three-piece charcoal pinstripe suit that projected an undeniable aura of immense wealth and strict, uncompromising professionalism. A silk tie rested perfectly against his crisp white collar, and his polished Oxford shoes mirrored the flawless shine of the luxury car behind him. In his left hand, he carried a vintage, meticulously maintained burgundy leather briefcase holding the financial documents that would ultimately secure my permanent freedom. He paused for a brief moment, his sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the chaotic scene on the front lawn. He took in the cheap medical transport van idling loudly by the curb, the scattered garbage bags containing my clothes, and the pathetic sight of Bradley, cowering cowardly behind his weeping wife on the grand concrete porch. Sullivan did not register a single ounce of surprise or alarm upon witnessing this profound suburban dysfunction. He simply buttoned the center button of his suit jacket and began walking deliberately up the long, sweeping driveway. His measured, confident footsteps echoed with absolute authority against the pavement. He did not even bother to cast a second glance toward the trembling, terrified man hiding desperately on the elevated porch. He walked straight past Bradley, entirely ignoring his pathetic existence completely today. Mr. Sullivan closed the remaining distance between us, his composed demeanor a striking contrast to the utter madness surrounding my son-in-law and his ruined property. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of where I stood, clutching Diane and her silver photograph frame against my chest. With the utmost respect and profound professional deference, Sullivan bowed his head slightly toward me, acknowledging my presence as if I were the most important executive in his entire global portfolio. "Mr. Preston," he said, his deep, resonant voice carrying clearly across the quiet, manicured lawn. "I apologize if I am late. The traffic patterns leaving the financial district were unusually congested this afternoon, but I assure you that everything you requested in your urgent communication has been thoroughly prepared and fully verified." I looked at the man who held the key to my total liberation and offered him a tight, satisfied smile. "You arrived exactly on time, Sullivan," I replied smoothly. "Your impeccable punctuality is greatly appreciated under these highly unusual and deeply hostile circumstances." I tightened my grip on the silver frame, feeling a powerful wave of vindication wash over my completely exhausted soul today, right now, at long last. Bradley slowly peeked out from behind his wife and her trembling shoulder, his eyes wide with absolute, undeniable disbelief. The terrifying illusion of his violent loan sharks had vanished, replaced by the jarring reality of a high-powered corporate wealth manager showing ultimate respect to his supposedly destitute father-in-law. He stepped forward, his legs wobbling uncontrollably beneath his expensive tailored suit. He pointed a shaking, sweaty finger aggressively toward the polished executive standing confidently on his lawn. "Who the hell are you?" Bradley stammered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "He is just a bankrupt old man today." Mr. Sullivan did not flinch at the aggressive, highly disrespectful outburst from my cowardly son-in-law. He simply turned his head slightly, offering Bradley a look of profound, icy pity that one might reserve for a particularly slow, misbehaving child throwing a public tantrum today. He slowly lifted his vintage burgundy leather briefcase, resting it gently against his forearm, as his white-gloved fingers expertly manipulated the intricate brass combination locks. The heavy metallic latches sprang open with a satisfying, authoritative click that seemed to echo across the entire front lawn. "I am the private wealth manager for Mr. Preston Sullivan," stated with absolute, unwavering professional clarity, completely ignoring the frantic, sweating man trembling on the concrete porch. He reached his immaculate hand deep inside the plush interior of his briefcase and smoothly withdrew a thick, heavily embossed manila folder bearing the official crest of his elite Wall Street firm. "I am here to personally confirm that the massive technology conglomerate has officially finalized the complete unconditional buyout of your original semiconductor patent today. The highly complex corporate merger negotiations we have been navigating for the past 18 months have successfully concluded this morning. The massive institutional funds have fully cleared all federal regulatory holding periods without a single complication or delay." I watched as the color completely drained from Bradley face his arrogant jaw dropping open in utter blinding disbelief. He stared at the official financial documents resting securely in Sullivan's hands, his desperate mind frantically struggling to process the impossible reality unfolding right before his very eyes. "You see, Bradley," I interjected calmly, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any chaotic emotion. "You spent years loudly mocking my quiet life, aggressively calling my life work a worthless piece of trash. You genuinely believed that because I did not aggressively flaunt my money with leased luxury cars and incredibly risky cryptocurrency bets, I must be entirely destitute and hopelessly bankrupt. But while you were busy drowning yourself in massive, dangerous debts to impress your shallow friends, my brilliant engineering designs were quietly changing the entire digital landscape of modern computing. My small, insignificant patent became the fundamental, indispensable keystone for an entire generation of advanced microprocessors." Sullivan nodded respectfully, turning his full attention back to me, holding the thick folder out with both hands as a gesture of ultimate, undeniable financial triumph right now, today, completely. Mr. Sullivan extended his arms and formally handed me the thick financial statement, opening the premium leather cover so the bold black ink could clearly catch the bright afternoon sunlight. "I am incredibly pleased to report that after all necessary capital gains, taxes, and institutional management fees have been meticulously deducted and fully settled, your current liquid account balance is exactly $4,520,000. Sir Sullivan announced, his voice projecting the undeniable weight of absolute truth. The sheer magnitude of that staggering numerical figure hung heavily in the quiet suburban air, completely shattering the pathetic illusion of my supposed poverty. Bradley's knees physically buckled beneath his tailored navy suit pants. He let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, his entire body suddenly collapsing against the decorative stone pillar of the grand porch, as his legs completely lost their ability to support his weight. Sarah gasped loudly, her hands flying up to cover her trembling mouth, as hot tears of absolute shock streamed down her pale cheeks. The staggering realization that the father they were actively plotting to throw into a miserable state-run psychiatric facility was actually a multi-millionaire hit them with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. I slowly looked down at the official bank statement, allowing my eyes to trace the beautiful, undeniable string of zeros printed securely next to my name. My long, quiet patience had finally yielded an extraordinary harvest. I had deliberately allowed my wealth to quietly accumulate in the shadows, waiting for the perfect, absolute moment to utilize it. Bradley stared blankly at the cold ground, his fragile mind completely broken by the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of his own catastrophic, monumental miscalculation today. He instantly realized his entire greedy life was absolutely permanently ruined right now, forever today. I firmly grasped the heavy leather folder securing the undeniable proof of my permanent financial independence against my chest, alongside Diane's beautiful silver photograph frame. I took 3 slow, deliberate steps forward, closing the distance between the lush green lawn and the bottom of the grand concrete staircase. I looked dead into Bradley, terrified wide eyes stripping away every single ounce of the pathetic, confused senior citizen persona I had carefully maintained all morning. Did you really think a man who engineered highly complex microprocessors could not instantly see right through a 2-bit, completely fraudulent stockbroker? I asked, my voice slicing through his fragile ego like a freshly sharpened blade. You arrogantly assumed my quiet nature was a clear symptom of failing intelligence. You left your encrypted tablet sitting on the kitchen counter, completely forgetting that I possessed the analytical skills to effortlessly decipher your greasy fingerprints and read every single one of your pathetic, desperate emails to your corrupt doctor and your violent loan sharks. You played a foolish, incredibly dangerous game against a man who fundamentally understands exactly how to permanently dismantle broken, utterly worthless systems, like your entire pathetic financial life right now, today, completely. Bradley let out a sudden, loud, involuntary gasp, finally realizing the absolute totality of his complete exposure today. He clearly knew I possessed all the undeniable evidence needed to send him to federal prison forever. Without uttering another single word to the trembling coward crying on the concrete porch, I slowly turned my body back toward Mr. Sullivan, who stood perfectly straight and attentive beside the gleaming black luxury vehicle. I am entirely finished with this pathetic charity project, I stated clearly. Initiate an immediate total freeze on the secret blind trust, paying this massive house mortgage right now today. Bradley heard those final words, and his entire fragile reality shattered completely. He stumbled down the concrete steps of the grand porch, his expensive shoes slipping awkwardly against the damp grass. He collapsed, his knees slamming hard into the manicured lawn right at my feet. The arrogant stockbroker who had spent the last 3 years treating me like garbage was now openly sobbing like a terrified child. Ugly tears streamed down his pale face, ruining his carefully styled appearance. He reached out with trembling hands, desperately grabbing the fabric of my flannel trousers. "Jack, please, you cannot do this to us," he wailed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You cannot freeze the mortgage payments right now. If the bank forecloses on this house, I will lose my absolute last chance to secure the equity loan I desperately need to survive. I owe $1.2 million to incredibly dangerous people. They are not corporate bankers who send polite letters. They are violent criminals who promise to send armed men to this very property by Friday if I do not pay them their money in full. You are a multi-millionaire now. You have over $4.5 million sitting in liquid cash today. You could easily pay off my entire debt right this second and barely feel the financial impact. We are family, Jack. You have to help your family. I am Sarah's husband. I am the man she loves. If you let these violent loan sharks come after me, you are putting your own daughter in terrible physical danger. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, just grant me a temporary personal loan to clear this underground debt. I swear on my life that I will pay you back every single penny with interest. I will do whatever you want. I will be the perfect son-in-law. Just do not let them kill me over this financial mistake." I stared down at the pathetic man, clutching my pant leg, feeling absolutely no sympathy for his self-inflicted disaster. His sudden invocation of family loyalty was deeply insulting to me right now. You do not get to weaponize the concept of family only when your pathetic life is on the line, I stated coldly, staring directly down at him. You threw our true family connection away completely and permanently long ago, forever. I stepped back, forcing his greedy hands to slide off my trousers. You sat at that fancy restaurant and publicly humiliated me in front of your wealthy friends to feed your massive ego. I recounted, letting the absolute coldness of my voice pierce through his desperate sobbing today. You laughed while I ate cold bread, mocking my worn shoes and calling me a financial cautionary tale. You deliberately locked me inside this house without a phone, severed the landline, and banished me to a freezing, damp concrete basement while you desperately plotted to steal my only remaining asset. You even had the breathtaking audacity to take the beautiful framed photograph of my late wife, the woman who worked tirelessly to provide for this family, and aggressively throw her smiling face directly into a filthy metal trash can. I looked at Diane's silver frame still resting securely against my chest, and felt a profound sense of total vindication wash over my entire soul. You thought I was a senile, clueless old man who could be easily discarded in a miserable psychiatric ward so you could cover your catastrophic cryptocurrency debts. You did not want Family Bradley. You just wanted a convenient silent victim to exploit. You deliberately orchestrated every single step of my total destruction, fully intending to leave me rotting in a sterile facility while you lived comfortably in a sprawling mansion purchased with my hard-earned money. Well, the tables have permanently turned on you today. You wanted me bankrupt, Bradley. Now you get to see what real bankruptcy looks like. You will personally experience the exact same terrifying isolation and profound financial devastation that you actively tried to forcefully inflict upon my innocent life right now in this exact moment, without any mercy or any hesitation whatsoever today. I turned my absolute attention away from the pathetic, weeping stockbroker sobbing loudly on the grass. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the corrupt medical professional attempting to quietly escape the disastrous scene. Dr. Evans, realizing that his highly illegal psychiatric conspiracy had completely imploded, was currently tiptoeing backwards across the manicured lawn. He was desperately trying to sneak his way toward his flashy imported sedan, parked carelessly along the busy suburban street. His hands were shaking violently as he clutched the thick, unmarked manila envelope stuffed heavily with $50,000 in dirty cash. I extended my right arm and pointed a firm, unwavering finger directly at his retreating figure, Sullivan. I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every single person on the property could hear my command. That despicable man walking away is a disgraced fraud who just accepted an enormous illegal bribe to sign a completely fabricated declaration of mental incompetence against me. Our private investigator has already successfully accessed Bradley's encrypted tablet and retrieved the full security camera footage documenting this entire illicit transaction inside the living room today. Sullivan, forward the footage of this bribery to the medical board immediately right now. Dr. Evans physically stumbled over his own expensive shoes in pure terror. He desperately sprinted the remaining distance to his sedan, abandoning his arrogant posture completely to flee the devastating legal consequences of his own horrific greed. Before Bradley could even process the fact that his incredibly expensive bribed physician was rapidly driving away, a sharp, piercing electronic noise suddenly shattered the heavy silence of the front lawn. Bradley's smartphone began ringing incessantly from deep inside his tailored suit jacket pocket. The violent, ruthless underground debt collectors were officially calling him to brutally collect their massive debt right now, today. The harsh, repetitive ringing of Bradley's smartphone cut through the cool suburban air like a warning siren. He stared down at his vibrating pocket with wide, terrified eyes, paralyzed by the undeniable reality of his impending doom. He did not dare to answer the call. I watched him tremble on the damp grass broken by his own astronomical greed and boundless arrogance. But the violent debt collectors were not his only catastrophic financial problem today. I took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the final devastating blow that would dismantle his entire fabricated existence. I looked directly at Sarah, still cowering on the porch, and then back down to the weeping man at my feet. There is one more crucial detail you both need to fully comprehend before I permanently depart this property. I announced, my voice carrying the steady, uncompromising weight of absolute truth. You have spent the last 3 years parading around this affluent neighborhood, boasting about your massive wealth and your brilliant financial acumen. You firmly believed you were successfully managing the exorbitant monthly payments on this sprawling luxury estate, all by yourselves. You proudly flaunted your designer clothes and expensive leased vehicles, completely convinced that your stockbroker salary was more than sufficient to sustain your incredibly lavish lifestyle. But that was nothing more than a pathetic, elaborate delusion. I paused, letting the silence amplify the magnitude of my revelation. 2 years ago, when your reckless spending first began to spiral wildly out of control, I quietly stepped in to prevent your complete ruin. I established a secure, anonymous blind trust operated by Mr. Sullivan's firm. For 24 consecutive months, that invisible trust has been secretly subsidizing the massive premium on your severely underwater mortgage. I have been personally injecting thousands of dollars into your bank accounts every single month to keep this massive roof over your arrogant heads. You were never financially independent. You were actively surviving on my continuous silent charity, while simultaneously plotting to throw me into a miserable psychiatric ward and steal my remaining equity. The shock on their faces was profound. Bradley's mouth hung open, his breathing erratic, as he processed the fact that his upper-class identity was entirely funded by the very man he had tormented. Sarah covered her face with her hands, finally realizing the staggering depth of my silent sacrifices and her husband's profound absolute failure today. Mr. Sullivan stepped forward with practiced efficiency, seamlessly retrieving a sleek silver fountain pen and a heavily bound legal document from his vintage burgundy briefcase. He turned toward the pristine black Mercedes Maybach, gently placing the thick paperwork perfectly flat against the highly polished hood of the massive luxury vehicle. This is the official termination directive for the anonymous blind trust, Mr. Sullivan explained, his resonant voice projecting absolute authority across the manicured lawn today. By providing your signature here, you are permanently revoking all future financial subsidies directed toward this specific property and simultaneously invoking your legal right to demand the immediate return of your initial capital investment. I approached the magnificent automobile with a profound sense of long-awaited, incredibly satisfying personal liberation. I placed my left hand firmly against the cool metal of the expensive car, anchoring myself in this monumental moment of ultimate vindication. Taking the silver pen from my wealth manager, I did not hesitate or display even a single fraction of the manufactured weakness I had utilized earlier this morning. With bold, decisive strokes, I signed my full name across the bottom of the formal termination agreement, officially severing my invisible financial lifeline to their deeply parasitic existence. The crisp sound of the sharp pen scratching against the heavy parchment felt exactly like heavy iron chains physically breaking away from my weary shoulders. I handed the document back to Mr. Sullivan, who immediately secured the binding directive safely inside his dark leather briefcase. The monumental transaction was completely finalized, legally binding, and entirely irreversible under strict financial law. I had systematically stripped away every protective layer of their unearned comfort, reclaiming my stolen equity while actively condemning them to face the severe consequences of their spectacular financial incompetence right now today, without any fail. Without the vital protection of my secret monthly subsidies covering the massive financial shortfall, the primary lending institution will initiate aggressive foreclosure proceedings against this sprawling luxury estate. Within exactly 30 days, I announced, watching his fragile world crumble completely. The bank will systematically seize this entire property to recover their massive losses, leaving you absolutely nothing to offer those incredibly violent underground criminals demanding their extortionate payments by Friday. The devastating reality of his inescapable permanent ruin struck Bradley with the sheer force of a physical blow. He let out a very loud, agonizing gasp, frantically clutching his chest as a severe panic attack suddenly gripped his trembling body. He collapsed forcefully onto his hands and knees, hyperventilating wildly as the dark edges of his vision undoubtedly began to close in around him. He clawed desperately at the damp grass, gasping audibly for air, while his phone continued its relentless, terrifying ringing inside his pocket. The arrogant stockbroker was entirely broken, thoroughly dismantled by the very man he had so ruthlessly attempted to discard forever. His beautiful, expensive world was rapidly burning completely down to ashes right before my deeply satisfied, unsympathetic eyes in this exact defining moment today. As Bradley hyperventilated uncontrollably on the ground, Sarah finally shattered her cowardly silence. She sprinted recklessly down the grand concrete steps, her silk robe billowing wildly behind her as she crossed the manicured lawn. Tears streamed continuously down her face as she lunged toward me desperately, grabbing the soft flannel sleeve of my worn shirt with both of her trembling hands. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry for everything we did to you," she wailed loudly, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "Please do not leave me alone with him to face this terrible disaster. I beg you for forgiveness." I looked down at the frantic woman, desperately clutching my worn flannel sleeve. This was my only child, the little girl I had raised with every ounce of love and devotion I possessed. For a brief agonizing moment, my paternal instincts screamed at me to wrap my arms around her trembling shoulders, to whisper soothing words into her ear, and to miraculously fix this catastrophic mess, just as I had always done in the past. But as I stared into her tear-filled eyes, I saw the undeniable truth reflecting back at me. I saw the profound weakness that had allowed her to stand by silently, while her arrogant husband systematically plotted to destroy my entire life. I saw the cowardly complicity that kept her perfectly quiet when he locked me in a freezing basement and threatened to lock me away in a miserable psychiatric ward forever. If I simply bailed her out today, I would only be reinforcing the toxic cycle of abuse and financial dependence that had brought us to this tragic breaking point in the first place. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my racing heart against the overwhelming tide of emotional manipulation. "Sarah." I began keeping my voice incredibly calm, but completely stripped of the soft, enabling warmth she was desperately hoping to hear right now. "I love you more than anything else in this world, and I always will. You are my daughter, and nothing will ever fundamentally change that biological and emotional fact. But true love does not mean blindly protecting you from the severe consequences of your own terrible choices. You chose to marry a deeply flawed, malicious man who valued superficial wealth over basic human decency. You chose to look the other way while he aggressively stole from my checking account, mocked my quiet life, and actively conspired to strip away my fundamental human rights today. You stood by the front door in total silence while he threw your mother's beautiful photograph into a filthy metal trash can. You allowed your fear and your desire for a comfortable luxury lifestyle to completely override your moral compass. I cannot and will not continue to shield you from the disastrous reality you actively helped create. Enabling your profound weakness right now would be the greatest, most devastating failure I could possibly ever commit as your father today, in this extremely defining, critical moment. Sarah continued to weep openly, her tears soaking into the worn fabric of my sleeve as she desperately waited for a miraculous financial rescue that was never going to come. I stared down at her shaking form, hardening my heart to deliver the absolute final condition of my continued presence in her life. "I will not pay a single cent of your husband's massive underground debt," I stated with unwavering, crystal-clear authority. "I will not utilize the money your mother and I carefully saved, nor the royalties from my life's work, to rescue a cruel, malicious monster who actively sought to lock me away in a sterile cage. His catastrophic financial failures are entirely his own burden to bear, and he will have to face the ruthless consequences of his blinding arrogance alone. He made his terrible choices, and now the harsh reality of those decisions has arrived at his doorstep. However, because you are my daughter, I will offer you one incredibly strict, non-negotiable path forward today. If you truly want my help, and if you genuinely wish to remain a part of my life moving forward, you must completely sever your ties to this incredibly toxic, artificial existence right now. You must officially file for divorce from that wicked man hyperventilating on the grass behind you. You must move out of this sprawling, unpaid mansion find a modest apartment you can actually afford, and immediately get a full-time job to support yourself independently. You need to learn what true dignity actually means, Sarah. You need to understand the profound value of honest hard work and personal responsibility without relying on stolen money or my silent charity to sustain a fake, glamorous lifestyle. Those are my absolute final and completely unalterable terms for you starting today. Sarah stared up at me, her wide eyes completely overwhelmed by the monumental life-changing decision I had just firmly laid upon her trembling shoulders. She opened her mouth as if to beg for an easier, softer alternative, but she quickly recognized the absolute unyielding resolve permanently etched across my aged face. I was no longer the quiet, accommodating father she could easily ignore or thoughtlessly discard at her cruel husband's wicked command. I reached out with my free hand, and very gently, but with profound finality, peeled her desperately clinging fingers away from my worn flannel sleeve. I took one final deliberate step backward physically and emotionally, severing the toxic tether that had bound us to this disastrous house. Holding the precious silver-framed photograph of Diane securely against my chest, I slowly turned my back on my weeping daughter and the ruined, panicked man writhing on the damp grass. Mr. Sullivan respectfully held the heavy door of the pristine black Mercedes Maybach wide open for me. I climbed smoothly into the luxurious, quiet rear passenger compartment, settling deeply into the plush leather seating as the heavy protective door closed firmly and securely behind me right now, today, completely. The powerful, sophisticated engine of the immaculate luxury vehicle engaged with a low, incredibly smooth rumble that completely drowned out the frantic, chaotic sobbing echoing across the ruined suburban lawn. Through the dark, heavily tinted glass of the rear passenger window, I watched completely dispassionately as the gleaming car accelerated steadily down the long, winding driveway. Sarah remained absolutely frozen on the cold pavement, staring hopelessly after my departing vehicle, while Bradley continued to violently hyperventilate on the damp grass right beside the massive unpaid mansion they were destined to permanently lose within exactly 30 incredibly short, agonizing days forever. 6 months have passed since that incredibly chaotic afternoon on the damp suburban lawn. I am currently sitting inside a beautiful, brightly sunlit corner office located on the top floor of a prestigious downtown high-rise building. The expansive glass windows offer a magnificent sweeping view of the vibrant city skyline, a stark and highly welcome contrast to the freezing damp concrete basement where I was once maliciously banished by a greedy coward. The heavy mahogany desk in front of me is meticulously organized, holding a pristine stack of thick legal documents that represent the absolute culmination of my lifelong hard work and quiet, enduring patience. Mr. Sullivan sits comfortably in a plush leather armchair, positioned directly across from me, his vintage burgundy briefcase resting securely by his polished Oxford shoes. He hands me a sleek silver fountain pen with a warm, genuine smile of profound professional respect. I take the heavy pen and lean forward, carefully placing my signature across the bottom line of the final binding contract. By executing this specific legal directive today, I am officially establishing the Diane Preston Engineering Scholarship Foundation. This substantial philanthropic endowment is entirely funded by a significant portion of my accumulated semiconductor patent royalties. It is specifically designed to provide comprehensive full-ride university tuition and vital living stipends to brilliant, underprivileged young students who possess a burning passion for advanced mechanical engineering, but fundamentally lack the necessary financial resources to pursue their ambitious academic dreams. I look down at the elegant embossed seal bearing my late wife's beautiful name and feel an overwhelming surge of profound emotional peace wash over my entire soul. Diane always believed that true wealth was never measured by the shallow accumulation of luxury sports cars or sprawling, heavily mortgaged mansions. She firmly taught me that genuine success is solely defined by the positive, lasting impact we actively choose to leave behind for the next aspiring generation. I am finally utilizing my quiet, hidden fortune to honor her incredible memory actively transforming the dark, bitter ashes of my son-in-law's terrible betrayal into a bright, shining beacon of absolute hope for deserving young minds today. This new chapter of my life is dedicated purely to creating lasting opportunities for those who truly need and appreciate them. My personal legacy is permanently secure, and my old heart is completely at peace right now and forever today. While I am currently building a powerful and positive new legacy for the future, the arrogant man who viciously attempted to destroy my entire life is facing a vastly different and incredibly bleak reality. As I had clearly predicted, the primary lending institution aggressively foreclosed on that sprawling luxury mansion exactly 30 days after I officially severed my invisible financial subsidy. Without my quiet monthly payments secretly keeping his artificial lifestyle afloat, Bradley lost absolutely everything. The violent underground debt collectors he recklessly borrowed from eventually caught up with him, forcing him to desperately confess his numerous illegal activities to the local authorities, simply to secure police protection from their violent threats. He is currently facing multiple severe federal fraud charges, completely stripped of his lucrative stockbroker license, and hopelessly trapped, living inside a cheap, dilapidated roadside motel on the outskirts of the city while awaiting his impending criminal trial. His arrogant, superficial world completely collapsed the exact moment he could no longer maliciously exploit my deep generosity. My daughter Sarah, however, chose a different path forward. Recognizing the absolute, undeniable truth of my final, uncompromising ultimatum, she officially filed for divorce from Bradley the very next morning. She moved into a modest, affordable one-bedroom apartment and secured a full-time entry-level position working as a front desk receptionist at a local community medical clinic. She is finally learning exactly what true dignity actually means. We meet for a quiet cup of coffee every Sunday afternoon now. Our cautious conversations are slowly, meticulously rebuilding the deep, fundamental trust that was so severely broken. She is gradually earning her way back into my life, proving through her consistent, responsible daily actions that she is finally becoming the strong, independent woman her mother and I always raised her to be. I gently close the heavy leather folder and hand it safely back to Mr. Sullivan, taking a slow, satisfying breath of the crisp, climate-controlled air circulating through the corporate office. I turn my chair slightly, looking directly into the camera lens to deliver a final essential message to anyone who might be listening to my story. Respect is earned, but dignity is something you never let anyone take away from you. Sometimes loving your family means letting them face the fire they started. It is a harsh, incredibly painful reality to accept, but it is often the only genuine way to break a toxic cycle of endless exploitation and profound entitlement. When you sacrifice your own fundamental boundaries simply to maintain a false sense of temporary artificial peace, you only embolden the very people who are actively tearing your life apart. You must fiercely protect your own value, even if it means standing completely alone for a brief, terrifying period of time. True strength is not found in endless, silent submission to greedy, manipulative cowards who mistakenly perceive your quiet kindness as a permanent weakness. True strength is found in the unwavering, absolute determination to demand the basic human respect you fundamentally deserve without any hesitation whatsoever. Do not ever allow anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, to dismiss your worth or treat you like a disposable burden when you have spent your entire life silently carrying their heavy weight. You possess the incredible power to completely rewrite your own narrative, to reclaim your independence, and to permanently close the door on those who refuse to value your presence. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a super. Thanks to help me share more stories. See you in the next one.